The cursed painting that moves at night. It started with the painting. Lena had always been a collector of oddities. Antique dolls, taxidermy animals, even an old phonograph that still played scratchy tunes from a bygone era. But none of those things made her feel uneasy. None of them made her wake in the middle of the night with an overwhelming sense that something was watching her. Then, she found the painting. It was tucked away in the corner of a small, dusty thrift shop on the outskirts of town. The moment Lena saw it, she felt drawn to it, an oil painting in a tarnished gold frame, depicting a young woman in Victorian-era clothing. The woman had pale skin, dark eyes that seemed almost too detailed, and an expression that was neither smiling nor frowning. The more Lena stared, the more unsettling it became. It almost felt like the woman was waiting. The store owner had been eager to get rid of it. "Are you sure you want that one?" the old woman behind the counter had asked. "People return it, say it gives them bad dreams." Lena had laughed it off, dismissing the notion of a haunted painting. She'd heard ghost stories before, but she never believed them. Besides, how could a painting be cursed? She took it home, excited to add it to her collection. She hung it in her living room, above the fireplace, where she thought it looked perfect. Then the nightmares started. At first, they were vague, shadowy figures, whispers in the dark. But soon, they became vivid. Lena would wake up drenched in sweat, her mind filled with the image of the woman in the painting. Only in the dreams, the woman wasn't frozen in oil paint. She was moving, walking toward her. One night, Lena woke with a start, heart pounding. Something felt wrong. The air in her bedroom was heavy, suffocating. She turned her head toward the door and froze. The painting was there. It was leaning against the wall, just inside her bedroom, despite the fact that she had left it downstairs above the fireplace. Her mind raced for a logical explanation. Had she sleepwalked? Moved it without remembering? She forced herself to breathe, picked up the painting, and carried it back to the living room. Maybe she had been more affected by the thrift shop owner's warning than she thought. Maybe her imagination was playing tricks on her. But the next night, it happened again. This time, the painting wasn't just in her bedroom. It was on her nightstand, propped up as if someone or something had placed it there intentionally. The woman in the painting looked different. Her dark eyes, once merely eerie, now seemed to glisten. And her lips, Lena could have sworn they had curved, just slightly, into a smirk. Fear clawed at her chest. This wasn't normal. This wasn't a trick of the mind. She tried everything. She moved the painting to the basement, locking it away. Yet every night, it returned, always closer to her. She tried burning it, only to find it untouched the next morning, sitting at the foot of her bed. The whispers grew louder. At night, she would hear a woman's voice murmuring just outside her door, soft at first, but growing more insistent. "Let me in. Let me in." Lena stopped sleeping. She was afraid to close her eyes, afraid of what might happen if she did. She researched the painting, desperate for answers. It was old, very old, but there was no record of its origins. Only stories of previous owners who had met tragic ends. One had gone mad, claiming the woman in the painting spoke to him. Another had been found dead, his body twisted in a position of terror. The painting clutched in his stiff hands. The store owner had been right. People had returned it. Those who could. Lena knew she had to get rid of it. She drove to the outskirts of town, to a desolate field, and buried the painting deep in the ground. She covered it with dirt, her hands trembling, whispering prayers she didn't even believe in. When she returned home, she locked every door and window, finally feeling a sense of relief. That night, she slept for the first time in weeks. But when she woke up, her breath caught in her throat. The painting was back, leaning against her bedroom wall. And this time, the woman in the painting was no longer inside the frame. She was standing at the foot of Lena's bed. My babysitter wasn't human. When I was 9 years old, my parents hired a babysitter. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Just another teenager looking to make some money watching a kid while the parents were out. But looking back, I realize now that something was deeply wrong with her. She wasn't human. It started with small things a child might overlook. The way she moved, too smooth, too precise, the way she never blinked, the way her voice, while soft and kind, seemed just a little off, like it was trying too hard to sound normal. I should have said something. I should have told my parents. But I was a kid, and I thought maybe I was imagining it. Until the night I caught her changing. Her name was Claire. At least that's what she told my parents when she showed up at our house for the first time. She had long, dark hair that fell straight down her back and pale skin that almost looked translucent under the kitchen light. Her eyes were the strangest part. Too large, too dark, like two pools of ink. I remember that first night vividly. My parents introduced me to her, saying she'd be watching me for the next few weekends while they attended some late-night business events. Claire smiled at me, her lips pulling back just a little too far, exposing perfect white teeth. "It'll be fun," she said in a voice that was sweet but oddly mechanical. At first, everything seemed normal. She made me dinner, mac and cheese, my favorite. She helped me with my homework. We watched cartoons together. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about her wasn't right. She never ate, never drank, never used the bathroom, and she never, ever blinked. One night, I woke up to the sound of something moving downstairs. It was soft, almost like the rustling of fabric. I glanced at my clock, 2:13 a.m. Claire had put me to bed hours ago. I should have been asleep, but the sound wouldn't stop. Curiosity got the better of me. I slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound, and crept down the stairs. The living room was dark except for a faint glow coming from the kitchen. That's where I saw her. She stood in front of the refrigerator, her back to me. But she wasn't eating, she wasn't drinking, she was changing. Her skin rippled, shifting in unnatural waves. Her arms elongated, the fingers stretching until they looked like thin, pale tendrils. Her spine twisted, her head tilting at an unnatural angle. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet were glued to the floor. And then she turned around. Her eyes, those impossibly dark eyes, widened when she saw me. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then, faster than I thought possible, she moved toward me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Claire, if that was even her real name, reached out with those impossibly long fingers, her voice suddenly sharp, almost desperate. "You weren't supposed to see." I bolted. Up the stairs, down the hall, into my room. I slammed the door shut and crawled under my bed, pressing my hands over my mouth to keep from making a sound. The house was silent. For a long moment, I thought, hoped, that maybe she had gone. Then I heard the creak of the floorboards outside my door. She was coming. The doorknob twisted slowly, clicking as it turned. I squeezed my eyes shut, my whole body shaking. Then, "Hey kiddo, we're home." My parents. The door swung open, and instead of Claire's monstrous form, my mom stood there, smiling. "Why are you awake, sweetie?" I peeked out from under the bed, barely able to form words. "'S Claire?" Mom frowned. "Claire had to leave early. She texted us and said you were already asleep." I wanted to tell her what I had seen, but when I glanced around the room, there was no sign of her. No long fingers, no shifting skin, just my normal, safe bedroom. "Maybe it was just a bad dream," Dad said, ruffling my hair. I wanted to believe him, but I knew better. The next morning, my parents called Claire's number. It was disconnected. They tried looking her up online. No social media, no records, nothing. It was as if she had never existed. I never saw her again. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up to the feeling of something watching me from the dark corners of my room. And in the silence, I swear I can still hear her voice. "You weren't supposed to see." Something followed me home from the cemetery. It started as a dare. Friday nights in our small town were usually dull, so when my friends and I ran out of things to do, someone always suggested something stupid. That night, it was Vincent who proposed it. "Let's go to the old cemetery," he said, grinning. "I heard if you step on a grave and say, 'I claim you,' the dead follow you home." We laughed, but deep down I felt uneasy. The old cemetery was infamous, abandoned for decades, filled with crumbling tombstones and twisted, overgrown trees. People in town whispered stories about the place. Some claimed they'd seen figures moving between the graves. Others spoke of strange noises, whispers in the wind. Despite my hesitation, I went along. We piled into Vincent's car, driving out to the edge of town where the cemetery loomed in the moonlight, its rusted iron gates hanging open as if inviting us in. Inside, the air was colder, damp with the scent of moss and decay. The tombstones, some leaning, some cracked, bore names long forgotten. We wandered through the graves, laughing and daring each other to do stupid things. Then, Vincent turned to me. "You do it, Luke. Step on one, say the words." I hesitated. The dare was dumb, but the weight of the stories clung to me like a second skin. My friends egged me on, their jeers pushing me forward. Finally, with a deep breath, I stepped onto a grave, the earth unsettlingly soft beneath my feet. I glanced at the worn headstone, Samuel Grayson, 1896-1932. "I claim you," I said, forcing a laugh. Nothing happened. The wind rustled the leaves, and Vincent howled in mock terror. We left soon after, the thrill of the night fading as we drove home. But as I climbed into bed, unease twisted my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Then the nightmares started. At first, they were vague. Dark figures standing at the edge of my vision, whispers too faint to understand. But they grew worse. I dreamt of the cemetery, of a shadow standing over me as I lay in my bed, whispering my name. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, my room filled with an unnatural stillness. Then, the real horror began. One night, as I lay in bed, half awake from another nightmare, I heard it, a soft scraping against my window. My heart lurched. My room was on the second floor. Slowly, I turned my head, dreading what I might see. At first, there was nothing, just darkness. Then a shape emerged, a figure standing just beyond the glass, watching. My breath hitched. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, but I was paralyzed. The figure was tall, impossibly thin, its face obscured by the darkness. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, it raised a skeletal hand and tapped against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to go away. Minutes passed, felt like hours before I dared to look again. The window was empty, but I didn't sleep that night. The following days were a blur of paranoia. Shadows seemed darker, my room colder. I swore I saw movement in my peripheral vision, only for nothing to be there when I turned. Then the whispers started, soft at first like the rustling of leaves, but soon they grew distinct. Luke, always my name, always close, but never from any direction I could pinpoint. Desperate, I told Vincent. He laughed it off. "Dude, you're psyching yourself out. Just forget about it." But forgetting wasn't an option. That night, I heard my closet door creak open. I froze, my body rigid under the covers. I hadn't touched it. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stared at the inky blackness beyond the doorframe. The whispers slithered through the silence. "Luke," and then footsteps. Soft, slow, moving toward my bed. I scrambled for my phone, fumbling with the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on an empty room. My closet was open, but nothing was there. Still, I felt it. The weight of something unseen, watching, waiting. I barely slept, and by morning, I knew I had to do something. I turned to my grandmother, the only person I knew who still believed in the old ways. When I told her what had happened, her face paled. She grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. "You invited it? Luke, you must send it back." She gave me instructions. Return to the grave, apologize, and leave an offering. "Spirits don't like to be disturbed," she warned. "If you don't make it right, it won't stop." That night, I drove back to the cemetery alone. The air was thick, suffocating, as I approached Samuel Grayson's grave. The headstone seemed darker, the name more pronounced. Kneeling, I placed a handful of coins and bread, an offering, and whispered my apology. "I release you. I meant no harm. Please, go back." Silence. The wind was still, the air heavy. Then a shift, like the world exhaling. The weight that had pressed against my chest for days suddenly lifted. The shadows no longer felt as menacing. I left without looking back. That night I slept for the first time in days. No whispers, no scratching at my window. Whatever I had brought home was gone. But sometimes late at night I still wonder, did it leave, or is it simply waiting?